Is Flora the strongest Winx? Absolutely not. I don't care what y'all say. All right, we got Flora broken down into two categories. We have combat and usefulness outside of battle. It goes without saying, Flora has a problem with getting knocked out. She looks beautiful while she does it. However, this is not good for battle, especially when you are the first person to usually get K'd out and then are sidelined for the rest of the battle. Not only that, but Flora, she's a support, right? Almost a medic, if you could think about it. But even when she uses her vines, not very useful because they hurt her. Flora is usually there to keep minuscule threats at bay while the heavy hitters like Stella and Aisha and Bloom do their thing. But the problem is that if she's too busy getting hurt, how is she supposed to support? Like, are we supposed to heal the healer? Flora suffers from not being bulky. She can't take a hit, and that's not good for a healer because we should not have to worry about healing the healer. That's her job. If the creators knew power scaling, they would have given her the ability to not only regenerate, but also to be able to have feats of strength that are defensive. But we don't get that from her. Instead, we have to watch her die and cry every time she throws an attack. Now that we know that Flora isn't necessarily good at combat, what is she really good at? Now, this is what gets me because in season 1, that's the Flora that I remember. Season 1 Flora was a what? She was a chemist. She would come up with lotions and potions to help the other girls in different situations. And in a lot of ways, this is where her healing factor comes into play, especially when you see how her season 1 arc with Murda plays out. However, this is swiftly X'd out, and her healing ability then goes to none other than Bloom in season 2. So that takes away a lot of the potential that she had in season 1. And then on top of that, the other girls get what? That's right, fairy dust in season 3. So now they're essentially all healers. So where's the usefulness with her again? Now, I will say that Flora is able to talk to nature. And that would be all good and dandy if she used it more often. She's usually too timid to do it. This even circles back to when she had to heal Pixie Village. And that took a whole episode of her needing to be cheered on to do what she needed to do what comes naturally to her. And in the magical dimension, when things are to the wire, we don't have time to be singing happy birthday. We need for you to do what you need to do and go. I hope I've made my points. Thank you. Is Tecna the strongest Winx? Let's find out. Here we have our underrated queen. We have her divided into combat and usefulness outside of battle. Now, in terms of raw power, Tecna is not the best. She's not like a Bloom or a Stella where she's able to just blow things up at will. However, what she lacks in power, she excels in having diverse spells. Electric energy blast, plasma bolts, nanobots, detonators that she can put on monsters and have them explode while she's on another side of the battlefield. Tecna has very diverse skills. She doesn't need to be the most powerful because she's going to use that what? Brain. Tecna's going to have a shield. I find that without Tecna, and maybe Aisha, the team skews a little too offensively. There are multiple times, especially in the first 2 seasons, that without Tecna, the girls would have been obliterated because nobody has a solid shield. You can always expect Tecna to have a shield ready, and it's going to hold up. But if we were in an RPG, Tecna would be the scout. She is the one who is going to find the enemy's point of weakness. She's going to look up all it can know about a situation. She's going to try and find the path in a labyrinth. She is the smartest of the group. I know that there are some one-off lines talking about how it's Musa and it's Flora, and like sure, maybe in like a book smart kind of situation, but when it comes to actual intelligence, we've got Tecna. And if you say otherwise, you need to write a dissertation, because that's what Tecna would do. Now that we know in terms of combat, she is here to balance out the team with defenses and strategy and not raw power, how does that translate outside of battle? Well, it's the same. We take those smarty pants powers and bring them right back over here. You guys know I'm horrible at drawing brains. But it still applies. Anytime there's a problem, you can expect Tecna to be able to find a solution. She is going to do research. And not only that, she's going to use that brain to come up with devices. There are a plethora of devices under her disposal, and especially in the 3rd season and beyond, you see that with the Dimensional Passage Creator, the Field Distortion device to get through that pesky barrier that Althea always puts up. Tecna is always bringing out different tools that the girls can use, and it makes her useful even when she is not in the field of battle. Not only that, but she has a physical connection to technology. There are instances where Tecna can literally plug into ships and computers and use them as their benefit. Like that one time where she had to literally pilot the space shuttle with her own body. I also think what's interesting about Tecna's relationship to devices is that it also seems like she can come up with inventions with seemingly nothing. When she was stuck in the Omega portal, well, stuck in the Omega dimension, I should say, she was able to use her Charmix to create a suit that allowed her to survive the elements of that icy tundra. She's a genius. And that's why it was so disastrous when she did disappear, because the girls knew that she was instrumental to the group. Without her, the group would fall apart, probably more than any other member of the team. She does a whole lot without having to have brute strength. So is she the strongest? No, but in my opinion, she is definitely the most useful. I hope I've made my points. Is Stella the strongest Winx? Here we have our shining star. We know the drill. Combat, usefulness outside of battle. Now, when it comes to power, no one is questioning Stella's validity. She has the power to harness literal sunshine and the moon when she remembers. She's been one of the powerhouses since the first episode. She consistently has strong spells, but outside of raw power, what exactly does that mean? Stella's power have a dazzling, explosive quality to them. You know when Stella is going to throw an attack, it's going to have a wide reach, which leads to one of its benefits, crowd control. Stella's spells have a wide range. This is excellent when the group is dealing with a barrage of opponents. Stella's light powers allow her to stun and blind her enemies. This is especially useful when she's fighting smaller battles and she doesn't have to worry about affecting the other girls. I wish they used her light bending abilities more often, like how she darkened Cassandra's perception in Season 3, or that horrifying scene with Queen Luna in Fate the Winx Saga, but the writers don't like when the girls are too scary, so we don't see the full potential of this. Battle experience. Stella is a year older than the other girls. This has given her more combat practice. This doesn't just show up in direct combat, I also think this also shows up in delegation. When the girls are in over their head, it's usually Stella who will make the call on retreating or calling out if a strategy isn't working. Stella is pretty even in terms of battle. We know that she's one of the powerhouses, we know that she's good at combat. The only caveat is that she doesn't have a variety of spells. She is usually reduced to just energy blast and a shield here and there. But now that we know that, how is she useful? Teleportation. How can I not talk about one of Stella's most iconic powers? Her scepter can allow her to teleport short and long distances. I do think that this is limited to whether she knows where she's going, kind of like Nightcrawler from the X-Men, but it still has its advantages. I could even include this in battle, because I've seen her teleport herself and the other girls to one point of the battlefield to another. Illumination. You can always count on Stella to shine bright, and you never have to ask her to do it. She hates the dark. She's gonna do it anyway. Very self-sufficient queen. You know I'm horrible at drawing brains. Cultural knowledge. Stella is the resident cool girl, and she has a catalog of cultural knowledge concerning the magic dimension, and this can help the girls get up to speed on customs and protocol that they wouldn't necessarily know about. Does the plot hinge heavily on it most of the time? No, but it does help in their more interpersonal problems, which can tend to get in the way of their actual work. Stella is going to call out some bullshit. Stella's RPG role would be a lancer. They often question the leader's decisions, offer a different perspective, or create tension that helps the group grow. The girls may not like this. It may not come out the way that they would like, but Stella keeps the girls in check and keeps them honest, especially when this applies to Bloom, who can often be too emotional to make big decisions sometimes. Like, Bloom goes through a lot, so it's usually Stella that comes in and is like, yeah, this is not working. So is Stella the strongest Winx? She's up there. Stella has raw power and she has decent defenses, maybe not so much as a Tecna or as Flora is supposed to be, but she is consistent in battle, and she has a variety of tools to her disposal. So in my ranking, she's up there, but I will do my definitive ranking once I break down the rest of the girls. Who do you think I'm going to do next? Is Musa the strongest Winx? Here we have our Fairy of Perpetual Angst broken down into combat and usefulness. Musa is not a heavy hitter. The other girls have more elemental-based powers, and that even includes Tecna. Musa's powers are sonic-based, and she can use sound and instruments to magnify her power. But she doesn't have that raw power, so she has to play the game differently. Musa is not in the front line of battle unless she has to be. She, like Flora and Tecna, act as support for the more offensive princesses. Musa is good at stunning enemies with sound, immobilizing them with sound barriers. There are even instances of her using sound to maneuver an enemy towards a more beneficial location. So while she is limited offensively, she does get creative. Another power that she's able to use is echolocation, where she can listen to find people. Musa's powers are the most associated with emotion. She can tap into the emotion of others and draw power from them, at least in the right circumstances. She can use her magic to lull people to a more relaxed mood, and quite frankly, I think this is such an underutilized skill. Musa should have been a straight-up empath who could influence and read people's emotions, but the writers don't care about her. Dark magic. Now, this is more of a wish for me than anything. There is a small scene where the girls take a class at Cloud Tower where Musa shows an aptitude for dark magic. We could have also seen this aptitude again when she faced off against Stormy and canceled out her power using a rain dance, which did not look like fairy magic, if you ask me. I wish the writers kept this up because it feels like it would have been so cool to have a girl on the team who specialized in dark magic for the sake of fighting against it, a know thy enemy type of situation. But once again, the writers don't really care about Musa. Oh, now that we know that she's not big on raw power and is more of a support and an emotional anchor, what is she useful at? Well, I'm kidding. In all honesty, I wish I had more to put in this section, but the writers, like with Flora, don't really seem to care about Musa in terms of the wider context of the story, and she's very underutilized, so this is going to be more of a wish fulfillment section for me. Once again, I would love for her empathic powers to be expanded upon. I would love to see if she could have a sense for whether somebody is lying, to sense the presence of a person or danger when it's not too far away, and even have her power of influence to bring in enemies. I feel like it would be so cool if, whenever the girls are against a slew of villains, Musa is able to use her empathic powers to turn those monsters and enemies back at them and pit them against each other, especially if she's using it with her potential for dark magic. That would make such an interesting character and give her so much more of an interesting fighting style outside of just sonic waves over and over again. And to that end, It would be cool that as the story progresses, she actually becomes an expert at dark magic, and so when Farragonda and Griffin inevitably get taken out of commission, Flora is able to use that knowledge to help the other girls, and that way it gives her a expertise that allows her to fully help the group. It feels like every other girl is an expert at something, whether that be combat or healing or technology. Musa doesn't have a shtick besides just music, and that kind of makes her boring. Musa is relegated to relationship drama, which she's not necessarily winning at, and musical performances where she's not even the lead singer. Justice for my girl Musa. Did not treat her right. So is Musa the strongest? No. Like Flora, I think that she is extremely underutilized. Is Aisha the strongest Winx? Alright, here we have our dancing queen broken down into combat and usefulness outside of battle. Aisha's powers are interesting because before she was just the fairy of waves, she was actually the fairy of fluids and water molecules. We see this most evidently in her Morphix powers. The fluid that she creates is almost like this Play-Doh or glue, and it can be molded into any shape that she wants. And this allows her to create weapons. While most of the other girls strictly are magic-based, like Tecna, she uses gadgets and tools and constructs to aid her in battle. She has swords, shields, lances, and there's a physicality to her fighting style that makes it really fun to watch and very useful. I also don't think this is strictly offensive because Aisha is always willing to put up a shield when she needs to. She can even use the shield to absorb the power from somebody's attack and then throw it back at them. Aisha is the team's muscle, and honestly, I feel like this was such a missing component in Season 1. She has a physicality that none of the girls can quite rival. Jumps, flips, punches, kicks. She can even use her powers to ride on a surfboard. It's just like a little something extra. Like, she's different. I also find that Aisha is able to take a lot of hits and get back up. She's arguably the sturdiest of the girls when it comes to taking damage in battle, and it makes her incredibly dependable. But of course, she also has the elemental component to her powers. We see the water portion of her powers more in later seasons, and she has a lot of ocean-themed spells in her catalog. I think what's interesting about Aisha is that if she wants to use her fist, she can. If she wants to use a weapon, she can. If she wants to use an elemental power, she can. She is very varied in battle, and she's very good at not only having offensive power, but also defensive power. So now that we know Aisha balances the team through physical strength and ingenuity in battle, how is she useful outside of battle? Aisha's Morphix powers allow her to create a lot of tools. Oculars, a pulley and crane, shield walls, surfboards. She even sealed doorways with her Morphix powers so nobody can get in. 40th member of the group, and her athleticism carries her not only in battle, but out of battle. She's the first girl who knows how to ride a hover bike, she surfs, she swims, roller skates, dances, she can climb mountains. These are practical skills. Is a classically trained princess, and that means that she is adept in diplomacy. It allows her to lead her people with strength and determination. She also uses these skills casually, like when she convinced a police officer not to invest the girls. Aisha gives practical advice. While Stella's advice may be too harsh and Flora's advice may be too poetic, Aisha gives practical advice to the girls, which allows them to solve problems a little bit more efficiently. She keeps things real without being as mean as Stella, and I think that this is very underrated in terms of her characterization. So is Aisha the strongest Winx? She certainly has a wide repertoire of skills. She's probably up there in terms of usefulness, like Tecna. But is she the strongest? That depends on my ranking, which I will do after Bloom. Is Bloom the strongest Winx? Here, we have our resident scene stealer broken down into combat and usefulness in battle. And yes, she's the keeper of the dragon flame. Yes, it's the power of the universe. But what does that mean and how does it manifest in the show? Bloom's powers are obviously fire-based. She can throw fireballs, unleash flamethrowers, even conjure the essence of the great dragon itself. Her powers are destructive and fierce, but it's also surprisingly limited with what she can do. Only so many fireballs and like a sprinkling of shields that you can do before it kind of becomes redundant. While I do think that Bloom's powers aren't necessarily fascinating, I do think that how she uses them and what they represent is. I've seen a lot of people say that since Bloom has the dragon flame, she has the power to create life or even create another universe, and that's debatable. I don't judge based on what a character hasn't done. What I do think is that the dragon flame represents almost limitless power. Bloom simply has an energy within her that just won't quit. It allows her to overwhelm her opponents because she doesn't run out of steam. This is why whenever Bloom's powers are compromised, like when the trick stole the dragon flame or when her enchantix was incomplete, it was devastating for her because she's used to being the one who can keep going despite all odds. Bloom's fighting style is basically an onslaught of energy blasts and spells. She fights through brute force, and that's because she has the energy of the dragon flame. The other girls will eventually tire out after extended battles. Bloom is usually the one who's not only still standing, but also encouraging everyone else to keep going. Ironically though, Bloom tends to get overwhelmed when she's alone and fighting multiple opponents that are strong together. Sometimes she can overwhelm multiple opponents, other times she gets overwhelmed. It really depends on her emotional state at the time. One of the things I do like about Bloom's powers is that she's essentially a nuke button, and whenever things come down to the wire and it doesn't seem like the girls have a chance of winning, Bloom has a tendency to just explode. This overwhelming burst of energy usually puts everyone in the immediate area out of commission. The only problem is that this doesn't always work, and sometimes a villain is left standing, and it leaves her and the other girls compromised. We already know that Bloom is arguably the strongest, and that she serves as a finisher. How is she useful outside of battle? This is definitely something that I think that Bloom had to grow into, but I do think that she is a natural leader. I think that her leadership qualities develop alongside her learning how to use her powers. She's often very good at delegating attacks, not necessarily strategy, but what I do like about her leadership style is that if she doesn't know what she's doing, she will let somebody step in and give advice. Willpower. This also ties into her powers, and I think this is probably Bloom's greatest strength. Her refusal to quit is usually what gets her out of impossible situations, and it also allows her to unlock different parts of her power, like when she was able to will herself into enchantix. I also like how she lends this philosophy to the other girls to inspire them to keep on going. On again, off again power with Bloom. Sometimes she has it, sometimes she doesn't. I personally think that this should have been left to Flora so we could give Flora more utility inside of the group. This is a straight up forgotten power with Bloom. There was like an episode where she was able to read people's emotions, and I also think that this should have gone to another girl in the group, Musa. But the writers like to steal things that could go to the other girls and give them to Bloom. So, is she the strongest? According to the plot? Sure. But according to me, that remains to be seen once I release my official ranking. My definitive Winx ranking. Last girl I call must pack up her bags and leave Althea immediately. Bloom, you have immunity due to plot armor and nepotism. Let's not get too lazy. Tecna, what you lack in strength, you make up for in skill. Keep your head up. Not everyone will understand you. Stella, you've been a consistent heavy hitter since the very beginning. I wish they hadn't lobotomized you in the later seasons. Next. Flora, the only reason why you are not dead last is because of spell diversity and a couple of lucky wins. But your fragility in battle makes you a liability. Let's head to the gym. The next girl that I call is still in the running. The last must pack up her bags and leave Althea. Aisha, you may not burn the house down, and you're not a force of nature, but your spell diversity, battle prowess, and physicality keep you in the top 3. Which leaves Musa. The writers hate you, girl. You deserve better. And just know that this is not personal. Okay, here are the teams that I'm thinking about doing next. You can decide by voting down in the comments. I hope I've made my points. Thank you for your time.